Now let me introduce our keynote speaker. Our institutions are faced with unprecedented stress, which requires each institution to revisit and challenge strategic plans created prior to the COVID pandemic, and possibly modify or adjust them according to rapidly developing future scenarios. The speaker will share her thoughts on reimagining research strategy for a post-pandemic world. Such an appropriate topic, considering everyone in this room plays a role in some way in putting together the data sets used to support institutional planning of the research function within universities. Our speaker received a bachelor's degree in hotel management and a doctoral degree in marketing from PolyU. She worked in the field of management consulting prior to joining the higher education sector. She was formerly the Director of Institutional Planning, the Director of Institutional Research and Planning Office, and Director of the International Affairs Office at the Hong Kong Polytechnical University, PolyU. Hong Kong Baptist University has this year appointed her Associate Vice President, Institutional Research and Strategic Planning. In this new role, she will play an instrumental role in supporting the advancement of the Hong Kong Baptist University, particularly in the implementation of the institutional strategic plan. She will lead efforts to spearhead the use of analytics and business intelligence to foster a culture of data-informed decision-making and support a number of planning-related initiatives. Please welcome Dr. Alison Lloyd.
Thank you, Patrick, for the very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here with you all today at the Pure Conference, and I'm very grateful to Elsevier for the invitation and the hard work they have put into making this conference possible. The past year has been a testing time with COVID-19, and the turmoil has placed immense pressure on universities, putting all our institutions to the test and pushing us to adapt rapidly to changing conditions. As of now, there are more than 46 million cases worldwide, and almost 1.2 million have lost their lives to COVID-19 and counting. All sectors worldwide, including education, have been devastated by the impacts of the pandemic. I think none of us here today ever imagined when we started the year 2020 that we would be living through our generation's largest public health crisis. Let's look at some of the headlines of the impact of COVID-19 on higher education in particular. Some countries, as Patrick has also mentioned before, have come under immense financial pressure due to the loss of international students. Such countries have come to rely on a healthy flow of such students to fund research as well as other activities. For instance, in Australia, foreign students actually make up over a quarter of enrollments, in fact, more than 4 times the OECD average. In fact, education is the 4th largest export, just behind iron ore, coal, and natural gas. The pandemic, coupled with geopolitical tensions, has seen only a handful of students actually return back to their country to resume their education amid the pandemic. The pandemic is also forcing the disappearance of higher education jobs. A recent estimate in Forbes shows that the projection of job loss to number in the hundreds of thousands of layoffs across public and private education sectors. And these losses are not confined to staff or non-tenured adjuncts or even auxiliary services, but full-time faculty, including some with tenure, could be at risk as universities are forced to adjust the size and scope of their academic programs. For graduates of the class of 2020, career prospects are in stark contrast to those of other years. Our students are graduating into what could be one of the toughest job markets in decades. The start of the academic year also saw a spate of headlines regarding the outbreak of COVID-19 across universities in the UK and also the US. The outbreak has led thousands of students having to self-isolate and institutions having to revert back to online teaching again. Some of the staff at these universities are in fact calling for industrial action, citing the earlier concerns about the risk of resumption of face-to-face teaching were not adequately addressed. We also see now lockdowns happening yet again, particularly across Europe, brought on by the wave of new infections. Lockdowns mean that academics are having to work from home. And for those with families, it has been particularly challenging with schools and daycare centres shut. The disproportionate role played in domestic and childcare work by women in particular during the pandemic has seen the sharply exacerbating gender and racial disparities across higher education. A recent Harvard Business Review article released earlier this year showed that in the first 10 weeks of lockdown in just the US, although total research productivity jumped by 35%, female academics' productivity actually dropped close to 14% relative to male counterparts. The effect of the pandemic, I would say, is projected to be felt in all aspects of higher education for years to come. So how have institutions responded to COVID-19? And I share with you the case of Hong Kong in particular. I would say Hong Kong in general has handled the pandemic reasonably well given the circumstances. Perhaps it's because we had prior experience from being the epicenter of the SARS situation back in 2003. And then more recently, last year, we had a spate of social unrest happen, which actually saw all our institutions having to end the fall semester online. For my own university, the physical campus has not actually been shut down. We had resorted to putting in place online learning since February. And since the end of September, we have resumed physical teaching, but we maintain it in a hybrid mode. So we're operating both physical face-to-face teaching, but also online teaching. But the campus itself, the physical campus, has actually remained open as we need to maintain essential and basic services through sort of more flexible working arrangements. And for us, maintaining operations as normal as possible was important because, like many other institutions, we had to make a very rapid shift to fully online mode. So how has COVID changed the face of research? I think it's safe to say that the pandemic has put science and scientists at the forefront of news. Science and technology have played and will continue to play a decisive role in mitigating the pandemic, whether it's about discovering new features of the disease, looking for new treatment options, or perhaps even ensuring the successful implementation of these policies, as well as a long-term direction for recovery. COVID-19 has triggered a boom in interdisciplinary research as physicians, public health experts, environmental scientists are teaming up to fight the pandemic. In global emergencies like this, open science policies can remove the obstacles to the free flow of research data and ideas and accelerate the pace of research critical to combating the disease. While global sharing and collaboration of research data has reached unprecedented levels, challenges remain. Trust in at least some of the data is relatively low. And there's all sorts of outstanding issues, including a lack of specific standards, coordination, interoperability, as well as data quality. It's safe to say perhaps the pandemic has exposed cracks in the foundation of traditional publishing models. There's been a surge of publications on preprint servers, open preprint servers, where researchers post studies that have not undergone scientific peer review, have been an important way to create a more timely, open, and inclusive access to new science. However, preprints of COVID-19 research can lead the media, public policymakers, clinicians, and also general public to assume that that work has been formally vetted prior to being posted. There's been a number of sort of high-profile retractions on some COVID papers, as some of you may know. These retractions not only highlight the effects of that mounting pressure to publish quickly can have, but they underscore a lack of transparency and accountability that are sometimes present in the more traditional model of publishing where there is widespread use of anonymized and opaque peer review. So I mentioned before, there's been a surge in research output, particularly on COVID. In the brief few months, actually, that the world has come to know COVID, there's been this huge volume of papers that have been published related to the disease. In a recent paper that was actually published in Scientometrics, just from the period of January 1st to the end of June in this year alone, the authors estimated that there were over 23,600 unique documents in both Scopus and also Web of Science, of which there were 9,900 or so that were common to both. And this particular set of output is only covering research articles, letters, editorials, notes, and reviews. It has not actually yet even counted any of those preprints. If we look at who's contributing to these papers, you'll see that from this same piece of research, they did find that in both Elsevier's Scopus and Clarivate's Web of Science, that the top country contributors to COVID-19 research were USA, China, Italy, UK, and India. However, the current situation, the impact of this can have a profound effect on universities and will force institutions actually to rethink a lot of their operating models, their strategies, but also the fundamental question of how we will deliver higher education. But nonetheless, it has also created opportunities. And the model of higher education has remained relatively intact for centuries, but the pandemic is forcing change upon the sector. So in the coming slides, I'm actually going to share with you how my university, Hong Kong Baptist University, has taken this as an opportunity, so reframe this as an opportunity to embark on pivoting our strategy to position the university in a post-pandemic world. So a little bit about my university. So Hong Kong Baptist University, or HKBU, we are a publicly funded liberal arts university with a Christian education heritage. Hong Kong BU has very humble beginnings and started out as a modest post-secondary college education, in 1956, and we acquired university status in 1994. So actually we're a very young university, and we are now leading in areas of literature, music, communication, and Chinese medicine. 2 years ago, in fact, at Hong Kong BU, we had just launched a new strategic plan that was designed to take us into the next decade. But with COVID happening, it has meant that we need to go beyond just firefighting now to tackle a lot of the change that's been brought by this pandemic, but to look at how we need to pivot our strategic plan to ready the institution for much bolder transformation beyond COVID or any other future novel infectious disease. In fact, the strategic plan was built on three sort of strategic premises, being delivering the best student experience, pursuit of research excellence, and doing all of that via capacity building. And laid out under the pursuit of research excellence were a number of drivers that would help us to attain it. And one of those drivers was about development of research clusters. And the university at the time carved out three research clusters, namely on creative media and practice, health and drug discovery, data analytics, and artificial intelligence. And these clusters have been developed at the intersections of society's needs as well as the university's strengths, and some key development priorities to embrace a renewed commitment to innovation and technology. However, to facilitate the execution of the strategy, it was found that the clusters had to be better defined to enable sort of more concrete collaboration and clear priority areas. And this translation happened at the time when the epidemic was fast turning into a pandemic, so it was timely. The translation became the development of 6 virtual interdisciplinary labs, which would offer creative solutions to emerging global challenges. And some of these labs were about augmented creativity, which is about augmented human creativity together with artificial intelligence, and it was aimed very much at creative industries. Computational medicine is about therapeutics and new drug discovery, underpinned by traditional Chinese medicine research. Data economy is about the new theories, practices, business practices, and technologies, and is focused very much on the development of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies, as well as data being the new asset and resource. Ethical and theoretical AI looks at the basic theories of AI with a particular emphasis on machine and cognitive behavioral studies, and central issues around philosophy and ethics. Smart society was looking at future organizational structure, in particular intelligent social administration, led by applications of big data technologies. System health is about behavioral and well-being mechanisms that underpin all complex systems such as life, environment, human society, and web-based media. The 6 labs served as a foundation upon which we could realize our research strategies. Reimagining our research strategy has meant a refreshed look at some of those key drivers that were already in place. For instance, we decided to place much heavier emphasis on projects that have impact on the wider community. The pandemic has shown that complexities such as disparities, inequalities, distrust in health systems, or other issues have to be factored into the solutions that we devise. So embracing the concept of engaged research, particularly with parties outside of the academy, to build trust in the expertise that the institution has is essential. We also need to take a much more fundamentally multidisciplinary approach, blending the insights and knowledge of different disciplines into disadvantaged communities, and having a very solid place for social science expertise. Tapping new funding resources has also been a priority, and these new funding sources have arisen due to the pandemic. Although the pandemic has actually seen budget squeezes in many countries and regions, and it has meant that we have to let go of research talent in some cases, our university has taken this opportunity to seek out research talent to actually join us. Universities also have a social responsibility, and this can be partly realized by actually having the university as a test bed for a lot of new innovations prior to wider rollout in communities. And so in the coming slides, I'm just going to show you a few examples of how this has played out for us. So an area of emphasis, as I mentioned, has been really having sort of research that has wider outreach and also impact on the community. An example here we share is actually from our School of Chinese Medicine. They developed a herbal remedy that enhances sort of immunity against viral infection. And this remedy was given away since early this year, in fact, since February this year, to residents of elderly care homes and underprivileged families receiving social security assistance. But beyond sort of outreach to sort of more vulnerable sectors of society, we've also provided similar remedies to our frontline healthcare professionals as a sign of our appreciation, as they really are on the first line of defense against fighting the virus. So we've been offering free dosages of this immunity boosting herbal remedy. And we've been very fortunate that this has been made possible by a lot of our generous supporters. In terms of research funding opportunities, in response to the pandemic, but also its evolving global impact, our funding body has been very supportive and allocated actually additional research funding to support the sector in conducting research related to COVID-19, but also other novel infectious diseases. And this funding is especially geared towards projects and solutions that can help identify and address the wider health, social, economic, or environmental impact of the epidemic. Universities are almost like miniature towns and cities in some ways. And universities can be an ideal location to test out innovations before their wider rollout. We've seen with COVID-19 that the test, trace, and isolate strategy is very effective. Contact tracing has been shown to help control the spread of the disease. Once we identify contacts, close contacts, they can be provided, of course, with early quarantine, diagnosis, and treatment in order to break that transmission chain. But relying on traditional sort of manual contact tracing is inefficient because it's subject to somebody's ability to remember who they've had close contact with over the past 2 weeks. So researchers in Baptist U developed a COVID-19 alert system, which basically sends a message to users via a mobile app if they and an infected person have visited the same place within a period of time. The system actually does not collect any personal information, so thereby protecting individuals' privacy, but yet alerting them to the risk of disease transmission. Right now, this innovation is being tested within the university, and going forward, we will be collaborating with government with the aim of helping society by transferring such research and contributing to the fight against the pandemic in Hong Kong. We believe that for a lot of health-related research, that science alone is not enough to understand and tackle the challenges. And we've placed a lot of emphasis on assembling cross-disciplinary sort of efforts. Our focus is really on addressing the new normal, but looking at R&D efforts beyond just vaccine development. So currently, if just on, say, COVID-19 alone, the university has actually over 100 different projects along these 5 different themes, as you can see here. One of the projects just mentioned before about BU Trace is actually one of those projects coming from this initiative. There's a number of different interesting projects under this endeavor, such as, for instance, understanding the impact of fake news about COVID-19 and its effects on individuals' protective health behavior. So as I mentioned, we're interested very much, in the area beyond vaccines. And one of the things that we do advocate very strongly is the importance that humanities and social sciences have in understanding and combating the pandemic. I think COVID-19 has shown the vital importance of human behaviors, such as, wearing masks, social distancing, in controlling pandemics. And the absence of a cure and an effective vaccine means that the world has so far been reliant on changing behaviors to prevent virus transmission. So behavior is very crucial to the success of these public health measures like, say, test, trace, and isolate, but also management of cases. There's a large stream of research happening here, in particular looking at the cultural differences behind these behaviors, whether it's, say, willingness to wear a mask, propensity to undertake voluntary testing, vaccination, inclination, and so on. So I mentioned sort of research going beyond vaccines. And one example here is a COVID-19 rehab program that we've developed. As probably you all know, people with COVID, even after they've recovered, they do still suffer from some physical or psychological related symptoms. And this, affects a lot of their capacity to carry out simple daily tasks, perhaps even due to, say, shortness of breath, muscle weakness, feeling fatigued. And these patients really need a structured rehab exercise intervention program, coupled with patient education and also counseling to overcome some of these struggles. And the university has developed a rehab program that actually goes further by combining traditional Chinese herbal medicines to regulate that immune function, but also promote healthy recovery. And to optimize that recovery process further, we're also using a variety of specific biomarkers to monitor quality of life of patients over time. We've taken the opportunity to fortify research talent. So in fact, in the strategic plan, there was an initiative called Talent 100, which was to recruit 100 faculty members from across the world. And we did that. But with the establishment of the 6 interdisciplinary labs, we've embarked on actually increasing our research talent pool in a scheme that is called Talent 100 Plus. And the plus side of this scheme is in particular looking for a lot more sort of multidisciplinary researchers. And we've made use of various research metrics as well in that recruitment process. We're now extending this program to, in fact, also PhD students because, due to COVID, many of them have had to, put off some of their plans for study of PhD. So we've started to recruit some very good PhD students also under this plan. So looking ahead, I sum up perhaps some of the challenges and the changes that the pandemic has brought to academia and how we might see that pan out in future. I think whether we like it or not, COVID has really changed the face of academia. But we should not fail to grasp this opportunity to create a true shift and start this by questioning what we do and how we should do it. I think we should take the best parts of our experience in responding and recovering from COVID-19 and carry these forward, as these are the foundations upon which we can build resilience together as a community. No doubt, the pandemic has also changed the face of academic publishing as well. And the movement towards preprint servers, open access, rapidly to disseminate insights and data are going to be a precursor to, in fact, even greater calls for open access, open science, and rapid sharing of knowledge. It's clear that we need a new publishing system, but the field of academic publishing will need to change, but it will require a lot of financial support. I think the pandemic will help universities to push back the perception that they are elitist and too detached. It's shown that universities have a good role to play in fighting the pandemic, and perhaps impact will take much higher priority. Looking ahead to research funding, perhaps researchers may continue to lose their jobs, and science funding for science may be diverted to resources to rebuilding our communities. But the current experience has shown the importance of science and that we can, and the importance of securing long-term support, particularly for basic research. So we may see a reshuffling of research priorities. So one way or another, I think academic life is forever changed, but it's important we take this opportunity to not only survive the current crisis, but also thrive by constructing a better version of research and education for greater resilience. Thank you.
Hello, Alison. Thank you so much for your very inspirational presentation. Really love the positive note, the end to it, in very challenging times. So we have a couple of questions coming in, if you don't mind. So I'll just fire away. So the first one is on the topic of collaboration, right? So the question is broken up into two parts, basically. The first one is, in terms of collaboration versus East and West, right? Given everything that's happening in the world right now, do you think will we become more collaborative between the two large parties, or is it going to be a more hyper-competitive era in science and technology?
Right. Thank you for the question. I think that despite the geopolitical tensions that are happening, I think we would expect to see even greater collaboration rather than competition. I think COVID has actually shown us the importance of collaboration between a large variety of disciplines, but also a wide variety of institutions coming together. So I would expect actually even more collaboration between East and West.
Thank you. And on that note, you mentioned a lot about the multidisciplinary approach that HKBU is taking. And I'm just curious, how does your institution incentivize or drive such behavior among your community? And do you think that will continue to evolve in this post-pandemic world?
Okay. I think it's very common. We've always seen with academia that academics do tend to be quite siloed in their work, not necessarily for lack of curiosity, but sometimes it's because the incentive structures that have been built into academic research funding have encouraged people to basically stay in their lanes. And for us in particular, building the 6 labs was one way that, we want to break out of these silos. And changes have been happening so that funding in our case is directed more to the actual interdisciplinary labs rather than to sort of separate academic units solely. And even appointment of people coming under sort of the Talent 100 plus side of things will be they'll be attached to one of these interdisciplinary labs rather than say just to one department. Even the Talent 100 sort of PhD scholarship scheme, here we're admitting students, to be engaged directly in one of those projects that are happening under these labs, at least for the first year of their sort of doctoral training. Currently, there's over 30 different projects that are happening under these 6 labs. So I think it's very important that the incentive schemes, the funding, etc., has to be structured in a way that is conducive to allow for that type of collaboration.
Thank you for that. And I think we have time for maybe one last question. I love the mentions that you have done in terms of giving back to the community. Just curious, how does HKBU approach reporting and measuring such efforts of research being returned to the community at a larger scale?
Okay, so we look at this in terms of knowledge transfer, but also wider engagement. And for us, it's important to remember that, this type of engagement, the coverage could be very broad. It could be about, intellectual property, patents. It could even be about, outreach in terms of public lectures, even performance of, say, performance arts exhibitions and so on. And so for us, I think when we look at it, it's not necessarily, the same situation of, say, looking at citations may not always hold, for instance, or other sort of more concrete research measures. But here we're going to be looking at reach, the extent, or the breadth of which, the beneficiaries have been able to be impacted in a positive way, but also the significance of that outreach. In terms of, for instance, how much has, say, that research or perhaps knowledge enabled or enriched communities, or perhaps improved products, services, or practices in some way, whether it's, to an individual type of group, whether it's to an industry, a sector, or government in particular.
Thank you so much, Alison. We're on time. So once again, thank you very much for your very insightful sharing and presentation.